Hello guys, my name is Kaimana Kane, and today I'm going to be giving you a book review on what was the Boston Tea Party. So you may have never heard of the Boston Tea Party, but the Boston Tea Party is not actually a tea party. It was actually like a protest for all the British taxes, a bunch of stuff like that. So they decided to protest. And there was I believe around 46 tons of tea were dumped. And it may not sound like a lot, but if you understand the weight and the mass, not the mass, but it's really heavy. It's like the weight of an elephant almost. So around 46 tons of tea were dumped into the Boston Harbor. So this all started, well, it was just starting. And a lot of British people and some American people really, really loved tea. So since the government saw that, he figured that he could make more money by raising the taxes. And then, people still kept on buying it because that just shows how much love they give or how much they love tea. So it was the same pattern. The government raised taxes, people bought it. There was a lot of other behind the scenes stuff and a lot of stuff like that. So the harbor's water turned brown just like a giant cup of tea when all the things were dumped, all the tea were dumped. And it kept on going. The government raised the taxes, people kept on buying it, and raised the taxes, people keep on buying it. But then once people had enough, gone up way too much, tea was too expensive, bunch of people were eating it, it went out of stock immediately. But now it was starting to not go out of stock, and I wonder why. It's because the tax made tea extremely expensive in America and Great Britain. So, yeah, and they did stuff like that. So then they started not buying the tea. So when they started not buying the tea, the government didn't get a lot of money except for all the other stuff that has taxes because, the government puts taxes on literally everything. Like if you went to buy a canvas or something, there'd be a tax for maybe $1. And, oh my God, just goes up. So people had enough of it. They started asking the government. They started trying to bring it down. And there was a bunch of other people who did it to try to bring it down. But I think it was on this page. But no one worked harder to get rid of the tea tax than Samuel Adams. And he didn't even like the taste of tea. So, and let me give you a little lecture about tea. So, tea mattered to the colonists. They rarely drank fresh water because they believed it would make them sick. They washed down meals with rum, ale, wine, beer, and increasingly tea. They brewed the tea leaves, which came from China and India, in boiling water. People believed correctly that boiling killed off any germs in the water. At first, tea was a luxury item just for rich people, but eventually almost anyone in the colonies could afford it. By the 1760s, Americans were drinking a lot of tea. People loved brewing it and serving it in pretty teapots for company. The richest had tea sets made of silver. So they had stuff like that. And so the situation got worse before the tea protests. Children and teenagers often confronted the soldiers. They would hurl insults plus snowballs, oysters, rotten eggs, and rocks. In this tense atmosphere, a clash was sure to come. One day, in a skirmish between loyalists and rebels, a loyalist fired shots. A 19-year-old was wounded and an 11-year-old boy was killed, so almost my age. The boy Christopher Sider was considered a hero who died for his country's cause, and this funeral was the largest held in America that time. So, yeah. So, now we can get to the important part. So, there's a bunch of people who did this, who dressed up as, Native Americans or Indians, and they dressed up so once they did it, nobody could tell who they were. And somehow someone did, and that's when they got hung by the neck. So they dumped 46 tons of tea, which I already mentioned. A bunch of people were cheering, but for some reason the authorities didn't come. The British soldiers. That was a kind of tongue twister for me, but for some reason they didn't come. Well, at least they tried to stop it, but they dumped in the water, made sure it sank, and from miles away you could see that the coastline was covered in tiny flakes, which was the tea leaves. So eventually they got hung, and they did stuff like that. So now you guys get to see before I show you the pictures, which for some reason is in the middle. I'm gonna tell you about some important people. Someone's name ended with Hancock. Paul Revere, John Adams. People called him Hancock. Samuel Adams, and yeah. So now you guys get to see the pictures. So these two, the picture on the bottom was created by Benjamin Franklin, and this is a street view of the colonial Boston that includes the old State House. So that's Houses of Parliament, London, and that's a teapot made by Paul Revere, and that's a portrait of King George III. And King George III is also important. There's a lot of people. History is not my biggest strength. So there's a tax stamp. There's a British officer with soldiers. There's fires in reaction to the Stamp Act, which is another act I'll tell you about later. What the Boston Tea Party may have looked like. So this book was mostly about protesting. There's George Washington shown as a Virginian colonel. There's a Georgian Governor Hutchinson as a young man. There's John Hancock. There's Paul Revere. So the Stamp Act was basically the same thing, but they didn't pour 46 tons of stamps into the water. So there's a tarred and feathered British customs officer, which was when they roll you in tar and they roll you in a bunch of feathers, and they sometimes beat you to death. There's a Boston harbor with 2 ships at anchor and British soldiers and men working. There's men pulling down a statue of King George III in New York. And there's another depiction of what the Tea Party may have looked like. There's the Green Dragon Tavern. There's an illustration appeared in a book published 100 years after the Boston Tea Party. And there's Paul Revere's engraving of the Boston Massacre, which was when the kids were killed. So the Boston Gazette and Country Journal, March 12, 1770, on the Boston Tea Party Day, on the Boston Tea Party. So that's handbill calling for the Sons and Daughters of Liberty to boycott important goods. There's Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, Samuel Adams, and Benjamin Franklin and the printer. So that's this shows the surrender of Cornwallis, but it is full of errors. For instance, Cornwallis was not actually there. And that's the signing of the Declaration of Independence. So yeah, that's all of this book. It included a lot of history stuff. I don't know how to properly explain it for you. It was hard to properly explain it, and here I don't study history. But one of my friends does, and he's really good at it. But I can ask him, and if you guys have any comments, I'll tell you. And I hope you like my book review. Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. And Shaka out of here.